Ladies and gentlemen, Tosh Talks. I'm Tosh Berman, the host of Tosh Talks. I'm Tosh Berman. And today, we're going to discuss Jonas Mekas. Jonas Mekas is a filmmaker and also a writer who wrote about film, specifically artist films or quote-unquote underground films. And Jonas Mekas was one of the key people in America who started a distribution as well as a location for independent filmmakers to show their work, or artist films. Artist films can be anything from narrative cinema to non-narrative cinema to animation to experimental. It's a whole wide range of styles and aesthetic sense that compresses or makes experimental cinema or artist films. I always prefer the term artist films because I think a lot of these artists, these film artists, thought of themselves as artists first who work in the film medium. It's like you're an artist who work in the painting medium, you're an artist who work in sculpture, therefore there are artists who work in the film medium. And Jonas Mekas is still alive, he's in his 90s, is an incredible supporter of the film arts. And he started the Film Anthology in New York, as well as the Filmmakers Co-op. And the Filmmakers Co-op is the organization that distributes independent films, mostly in 8mm, 16mm, and probably video as well. And if it wasn't for Jonas Mekas, you probably would not hear of people like Stan Brakhage, Kenneth Anger, Stan Rice, Tony Conrad, and so forth. And Andy Warhol. And Jonas Mekas is a fascinating figure to me because not only of his work as a filmmaker and as a writer, but he's also a magnet of sorts, that all these interesting individuals came to him or circled around him, or he entered their world. And at one time, New York, Manhattan specifically, was the magnet for artists to come and do their work. Jonas Mekas knew everybody from Warhol to Kenneth Anger to Erich von Stroheim to Fritz Lang to Stan Rice to Yoko Ono and John Lennon, and also knew Fred Astaire. And you think, how does Fred Astaire fits in the world of Jonas Mekas? Well, apparently Yoko Ono was making a movie called Imagine, probably based on the John Lennon album. And Yoko called Jonas to come in for a shoot. And he arrived, and his job was basically to do his own dance with Fred Astaire, because Fred Astaire was there to make an appearance in the film. And this is not, though it's a totally uncommon type of meeting, this is actually very, very in the nature of Jonas Mekas to come upon these people. His other good friend was Jackie Kennedy, the wife of John F. Kennedy. And Jackie Kennedy, I think, hired Jonas Mekas to be sort of a mentor or teach film studies or the practice of making films for Jackie Kennedy's two children, John Jr. and Caroline Kennedy. And so he was very close to the Kennedys in that sense. And I'm always interested in people who can somehow go with the low and with the high with no problem. How can anybody who can hang out with somebody crazy like Harry Smith and Jack Smith and yet on the other side be with Jackie Kennedy? Unless she's crazy too, which I suspect that may be the case. So you have these interesting people like Jackie Kennedy, Peter Beard, Jack Smith, Harry Smith, Warhol, the whole Warhol group. And in the center of all this is Jonas Mekas. And there have been various, I discovered Jonas Mekas personally because my dad knew him slightly, but beyond that, I used to read the New York Voice, the Village Voice. And Mekas had a column, a weekly column called Movie Journal. And when you read the Movie Journal, it's like a diary of a guy going to a lot of movies and making movies and hanging out with filmmakers. So reading the Movie Journal was just incredible, because you get this incredible snapshot of New York life in the 60s and the 70s. And it's kind of amazing, because like the Mekas world, including like Robert Frank and all these other people, they all associate it with Jonas Mekas. And the good introduction to the Jonas Mekas world is actually this book called A Dance with Fred Astaire by Jonas Mekas, published by Anthology Press, or Anthology Editions. And the book is basically Jonas Mekas' writing, but not huge text. It's like chunks of text with a lot of illustrations and pictures and artwork and correspondence. Like he has like a letter from correspondence with Louise Brooks, the great actress and a wonderful writer about film history. And this book comes alive. Looking at this book, you're getting the whole essence and the importance of film culture at a specific time and place. So we're talking about 1960s, 1970s, New York City, a little bit of Europe, but not Hollywood. Some people do come from Otto Preminger, Peter Bogdanovich, who, interestingly enough, wrote for Film Culture, which was a magazine produced by Jonas Mekas. Came out maybe like 4 times a year, especially during the 60s. And it was the best film journal of its time, and my favorite film magazine of all time. And the beauty of Mekas is his editing is to get writers together to write about not only the history of Hollywood movies, but also underground films. And I think for Mekas, there's no real huge difference between narrative Hollywood cinema and artists like Stan Brakhage. It's still the film arts. And I think Mekas really appreciated the whole very nature of the film arts. And A Dance with Fred Astaire, the book, really covers that whole era so beautifully. And it's kind of interesting how Mekas can go to a party and meet people and know somebody who knows this person, who knows that person, which is connection, like social connecting, which is not, still done to this day. But it seemed like Jonas Mekas had a special talent or art to connect people, with artists. And there's one, for example, I'm going to read you just one little excerpt from this book. Can I find it? Here we go. There's a little, not a chapter, but a little segment called Unabomber and Me, Henry Flint, Tony Conrad. I'm quoting Jonas Mekas here. Remember the Uma Bomber? We all do, of course. Remember the 3 or 4 full-page political rant he sent to the New York Times and it was published? I read a good part of it. I read it, and I stopped in the middle of the first page. That was it. I knew who the Unabomber was. Of course, it was Henry Flint, the Fluxus artist, mathematician, and musician. Every word I read in the statement sounded exactly like it was Henry Flint talking. Admit it, I say. Admit it, you are the Unabomber. This is after a few days later he met Henry Flint on the street. Flint laughed, and I laughed. We joke and we part. Then it came that the bomber got caught. Long court procedures followed. I don't remember all the details. I didn't exactly follow it. But a year or 2 later, Tony Conrad, filmmaker and musician, visits me. I don't know how the talk turned to the Unabomber. You know, says Tony, we went to Harvard together. In the court, he mentioned several times his friend Tony, but nobody paid attention to that. That Tony was me. And you know who else was in that class? Henry Flint was also in the class. We were all friends, unquote. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I was right. I should have reported my suspicion to the police. I was that close to it in my detective intuition. Incredibly close. By one chess move, that close. And if life is a chess game, Jonas Mekas played his game quite well. To this day, the film anthology is still in business at 2nd Avenue and 2nd Street in Lower Manhattan. And it's an incredible place to visit. If you're ever in New York, you should definitely go there to see a film or just walk through the lobby. It's a fantastic place. And again, I strongly, strongly recommend A Dance with Fred Astaire by Jonas Mekas, Anthology Editions. Wonderful book, beautiful book. And again, a beautiful exploration of the underground cinema culture as well as a little touch of mainstream cinema as well. Thank you. This is Tosh Talks. I'm Tosh.